The steel doors of the crematorium clanged shut behind Vladimir, muting the noise of the outside world and leaving only the familiar hum of machinery and the steady drip of a leaking pipe somewhere deep in the building's bones. The faint scent of antiseptic mixed with something older, charred wood, incense, and the sterile cold of stainless steel. It was the kind of smell that settled into your clothes, your skin, your thoughts. Vladimir didn't notice it anymore. He tugged his gloves tighter and wheeled in the next coffin, its polished mahogany surface gleaming under the overhead lights. Gold-colored handles lined the sides, and a small brass nameplate near the head. Read Aleksandr Lebedev, 72. There was no one accompanying the body. No family, no last-minute visitors. Just a clipboard with the order and a rushed signature from some courier, official but distant. Vladimir had seen dozens, maybe hundreds like this, unattended, uncelebrated departures. He often told himself it made things easier, cleaner, but today something felt different. He rolled the coffin onto the platform that led to the chamber, the wheels clicking rhythmically across the tiled floor. As he reached to double-check the alignment of the lid before initiating the final process, he noticed a small irregularity. A thin sliver of paper sticking out from the seam between the lid and the inner lining. At first he thought it might be a tag or scrap from the funeral home, but as he brushed it with his finger, it slipped free and floated down to the floor like a leaf caught in a slow wind. Vladimir frowned and bent down, retrieving the object. It wasn't paper. It was a banknote, old and slightly wrinkled, a 500-ruble bill, the kind hardly used anymore. Odd, he muttered, turning it over in his gloved hand. That's when he saw it. The ink was faint, written in uneven, frantic strokes across the back of the bill. His heart thumped once, hard, and he held it closer to the light. The message was only one sentence, but it hit like a punch to the chest. They buried the truth with me. Read my journal. A.L. He stared at the words, stunned. For a moment, the world went still, the quiet hum of the machinery becoming distant, distorted, like a muffled radio underwater. The room felt colder, narrower. Vladimir looked at the coffin again. At the name on the plate, A.L. Aleksandr Lebedev. Of course, the journalist, the one who vanished from the public eye after uncovering some high-level scandal. There had been whispers back then, rumors of threats, mental breakdowns, an investigation shut down too abruptly. And now here he was, laid to rest in silence, except, not entirely. Vladimir slipped the note into the inner pocket of his coat, casting a quick glance around the empty room. His pulse was racing, and his mind began turning over questions faster than he could keep up with. Why the message? Why the secrecy? And more importantly, what truth had Aleksandr taken to the grave? Vladimir sat hunched in the cramped break room, the ticking wall clock amplifying the silence like a drumbeat in his head. A single fluorescent light flickered above, casting a pale, jittery glow across the stained linoleum floor. His cup of tea had gone cold long ago, untouched, forgotten. All his attention was fixed on the old 500-ruble note lying flat on the table in front of him. He leaned closer, elbows planted, eyes scanning the faded, frantic handwriting once again. They buried the truth with me. Read my journal. A.L., he whispered the words aloud, as if hearing them might offer new clarity. Read my journal. A chill ran down his spine. Aleksandr Lebedev. The name stirred memories, not personal but powerful. Years ago, Vladimir had seen the man's face plastered across news reports and magazine covers, a relentless investigative journalist. The type who didn't back down even when the subjects of his stories were the kind of people most wouldn't dare whisper about. Corporate embezzlement, political bribes, a series of damning environmental reports that got mysteriously buried weeks after release. Lebedev had exposed it all. And then he disappeared. not all at once. First, his stories stopped appearing. Then came murmurs of burnout, a breakdown, whispers of paranoia. A few colleagues tried to defend him, but the narrative had already shifted, unstable, obsessed, delusional. Within months, he had vanished from the media altogether. Vladimir remembered thinking how strange it was, a man that loud, that fearless, going so suddenly and so quietly into the dark, now staring at this cryptic note from beyond the grave. Everything felt like it had snapped back into place, too fast, too sharp. What if Alexander hadn't burned out, but had been shut down? He sat back in his chair and ran a hand down his face, trying to suppress the weight creeping into his chest. The crematorium's silence now felt less peaceful and more suffocating, as if the walls themselves were listening. Reaching into his coat pocket, he pulled the note out again and held it against the light. No watermark, no additional markings, just the handwriting, rushed, desperate, real. He picked up his phone and typed Aleksandr Lebedev journal into the search bar. Nothing relevant. Just old headlines, some scattered conspiracy blogs, a few archived interviews from over a decade ago, no mention of any journal, no hint of unfinished work, and yet the message was clear. He looked around the empty room. He was alone, completely. He could forget about this, throw the note away, pretend he never saw it. But he didn't. Instead, he took out a notepad, wrote the date, and scribbled down the message exactly as it appeared. Then, after a long pause, he underlined it 3 times and circled the initials. AL. His hand hovered above the page. What now? That question echoed louder than anything else. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Vladimir sat at his desk, eyes fixed on the glowing screen in front of him. His fingers hovered above the keyboard, but he didn't type. The hum of machinery and the soft clink of distant tools seemed distant, as though the world outside his small office had ceased to exist. Only the chilling weight of the note he had found earlier that day kept him tethered to reality. He opened the official file on Aleksandr Lebedev, hoping for some kind of clarity, an explanation maybe, or a missing piece of the puzzle. The file opened, and the first few lines were as mundane as any other cremation order. Name Aleksandr Lebedev, age 72, cause of death. Cardiac arrest, natural. Autopsy report, not requested family contact. None provided request, expedited. Cremation, urgent. The rest of the details were unremarkable, standard procedure. Nothing about his life, nothing about his work, no personal history beyond the name and age, and strangely, no mention of any next of kin, just an anonymous courier's signature. Vladimir felt a growing sense of unease rise in his chest. Expedited, cremation. The term felt almost dismissive. He scrolled down the file further, his eyes narrowing. The cremation had been scheduled quickly, too quickly, almost as if the order had been rushed through the system. There had been no delay, no questioning. Whoever had handled it had made sure everything was processed with maximum efficiency. Vladimir's finger hesitated over the mouse, his mind racing. Why had no one come to claim the body? Why had the paperwork been so sparse? Even stranger, the courier had been listed as a third-party contractor. Most cremation requests came directly through family or legal representatives, but this was different. The room felt colder, the air heavier. Then, in the corner of his screen, a small box popped up, an email notification. It was from Semyon, an old acquaintance, someone who worked in the morgue. The subject read, Lebedev. Vladimir clicked it open immediately. Vladimir, I know what you're looking for. I can't say much, but check the delivery form closely. There are things you don't know. There's a reason it was rushed. I'll meet you at 10 p.m. Don't trust anyone else. A sharp pang of realization hit Vladimir. Something wasn't just off about this situation. It was a setup. But why? Why was this man's death so carefully orchestrated? Who was making sure that no one asked questions, no one uncovered the truth? His fingers trembled as he closed the email and opened another window. He began searching for any trace of Alexander's work in the archives, anything that might connect to his sudden death. But the deeper he dug, the more it seemed as though Alexander had been erased from history. Nothing recent, just old stories, fading memories. His name had disappeared from the headlines, his work buried beneath layers of bureaucracy and time. Vladimir glanced back at the note tucked in his coat pocket. His gut twisted. Read my journal. The words echoed in his mind. The journal had to exist. It wasn't just a call for help. It was the only clue. The more he thought about it, the more he realized the journal was the key. Whatever Alexander had uncovered, whatever truth he had discovered, it was hidden in that journal. And it wasn't just some old, forgotten document. It was alive. The world outside the crematorium had begun to feel distant, as though it no longer existed in the same realm as Vladimir's mind. His thoughts were clouded with the weight of the investigation he hadn't signed up for, but now couldn't turn away from. He had to find that journal. But how? Where? Before he could spiral any further, the lights above him flickered, twice, in quick succession. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. Vladimir stood up abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor, his heart racing. Something was wrong. He could feel it, a heaviness in the air, a shift in the atmosphere, and then, just as the realization hit him, someone else knew about the journal. The door to his office swung open without warning. Vladimir's breath caught in his throat as the door creaked open. He had only a split second to react, to brace himself, to prepare for whoever was standing there. The creak of the door echoed through the silence of the crematorium like a gunshot. But there was no way out now, not if someone had already figured out what he was searching for. He turned quickly, only to see a familiar face stepping into the room. Semyon. Semyon's grizzled features were set in a tense, wary expression, eyes darting around the dimly lit space. His hands were shoved deep into his jacket pockets, the flickering fluorescent light casting harsh shadows across his face. His usually gruff demeanor seemed more uneasy than Vladimir had ever seen. "You came," Vladimir said, his voice a little sharper than he intended. He forced his hands to steady, hiding the nervous twitch in his fingers. "Of course I came," Semyon replied, stepping further into the room. He glanced over his shoulder before pulling the door shut behind him with a quiet click. "But you've got to be careful. If they find out you're looking into Lebedev's death, you're putting yourself in danger." Vladimir stiffened. "You don't think it was just a heart attack?" Semyon's lips tightened into a thin line. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small, crumpled envelope. He didn't need to say anything. His actions spoke louder than words. He tossed the envelope onto the desk between them, and Vladimir hesitated only for a moment before opening it. Inside, there was a single photograph, a grainy black-and-white image. The quality was poor, but the scene it captured was unmistakable. It was a shot of Aleksandr Lebedev standing in front of a large, nondescript building, a warehouse perhaps. But it wasn't the building that caught Vladimir's eye. It was the figure next to him, a tall man with a dark suit, his face obscured by shadows. "Who's this?" Vladimir asked, studying the figure in the photo. Semyon leaned in, his face drawn with concern. "That's the problem. We don't know." He paused, looking uneasy. "I don't think anyone does. The people Lebedev was investigating, they're not just local." Vladimir's pulse quickened. He glanced at the photo again, tracing the outline of the shadowed man. Something about the way the figure stood, the angle of the body. It didn't feel like an accidental shot. This was intentional. Someone had deliberately been following Lebedev. "You think they were after him?" Vladimir asked quietly. Semyon nodded grimly. I'm sure of it. He lowered his voice even further, glancing at the door again, his voice barely above a whisper. Lebedev got too close to something big. Too many powerful people with too much to lose. If that journal of his surfaces, it's not just a few corrupt politicians getting exposed. This is bigger than anything we've seen before. Vladimir felt the weight of Semyon's words settle heavily on his chest. The air in the room seemed to press down on him. The reality of what he was about to step into feeling more dangerous than anything he had imagined. His instincts screamed at him to back off, to drop this whole thing, but the gnawing curiosity and the unsettling sense that he was already too deep into, this kept him rooted to the spot. Semyon's voice broke through his thoughts. You can't keep going alone, Vladimir. I'm not alone, Vladimir replied automatically, his mind already spinning with the implications. I need to find the journal. I have to know what he uncovered. Semyon stared at him for a long moment, then sighed heavily. Then you're going to need help and a lot of luck. Vladimir nodded, his jaw tight. There was no turning back now. He had seen the photo, read the note. There was no way he could walk away without answers. I'll meet you in the morning, Semyon said, his voice low but resolute. We need to get our hands on that journal before anyone else does. Vladimir didn't respond at first, his mind already racing with plans, scenarios and questions. He just stared at the photograph again, trying to make sense of the blurry figure standing beside Aleksandr. Every instinct told him there was more to this, something far darker than a simple investigation gone wrong. As Semyon turned to leave, Vladimir's thoughts lingered on the photo, on the man with the shadowed face. Who was he? And why had he been following Aleksandr so closely? A shiver ran through him. The answers were out there, but getting them might cost more than he was ready to pay. The night had fully settled in, a heavy cloak of darkness stretching across the city. Vladimir stood in the parking lot of the crematorium, the soft hum of the fluorescent lights buzzing above him as he locked the door behind him. The chill the air bit at his skin, the scent of wet asphalt and rust filling his nostrils as he pulled the collar of his coat tighter around his neck. He glanced at his watch. It was just past 10:30 p.m. Semyon was late. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and his heart skipped a beat. A message from Semyon. He opened it quickly. Change of plans. Don't come to the usual spot. Someone's watching. I'll send you coordinates. Stay low. The message was brief, direct and vague. Vladimir's stomach twisted. He could feel the weight of the situation now more than ever. The tension in the air, the fear, the sense of something ominous lurking just out of sight. He glanced over his shoulder instinctively, scanning the darkness. The empty parking lot felt even more desolate now, the shadows lengthening, the world silent, except for the occasional distant rumble of traffic. His phone buzzed again. A set of coordinates appeared on the screen. No words, just numbers. Vladimir didn't hesitate. He started his car and drove off, the tires humming against the wet road as he followed the directions. The streets were nearly deserted at this hour, the city's pulse slow, as if it too were holding its breath. The coordinates led him to an industrial part of town, the type of place where buildings seemed to lean in on each other, abandoned and forgotten. Old warehouses with boarded-up windows loomed on either side of the narrow alley where he parked. The streetlights were sparse, their glow weak and flickering like dying stars. He killed the engine and stepped out, eyes scanning the area. The air smelled of oil and dust. He pulled his collar up, more out of instinct than necessity, as he approached the entrance of the building. There was a dim light coming from an open door on the side, a single yellow bulb hanging above it like a beacon in the night. He could make out the faintest figures inside, shadows shifting in the gloom. As he walked closer, his hand instinctively reached into his coat, brushing against the note again, the reminder of what he was risking. Read my journal. It's still. It felt surreal, like he was playing a part in some twisted game that had already been set in motion long before he even knew the rules. He stepped inside the building, the creaking of the floorboards beneath his feet betraying the silence. The light flickered above him, casting long, distorted shadows along the walls. Vladimir, the voice cut through the stillness, low and familiar. Semyon. He stepped into view from behind a stack of old crates, his face tense, eyes darting around the room. "What took you so long?" Semyon asked, his voice tight with urgency. He motioned for Vladimir to follow him, leading him deeper into the building. The space was cluttered with old machinery, rusted tools, and boxes of forgotten goods, everything coated in a thick layer of dust. The air smelled stale, as though it hadn't been disturbed in years. "We don't have much time," Semyon muttered, glancing over his shoulder as they walked. "They're getting closer. They know you're looking for the journal." Vladimir felt a prickle of unease. "Who's they?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He was starting to realize just how deep into this rabbit hole he had already fallen. Semyon stopped abruptly and turned to face him. "The ones who want everything buried." He paused, his eyes hardening. "The ones who made sure Lebedev was silenced." Vladimir's chest tightened. He didn't need to ask for details. He could see it in Semyon's face. The fear, the understanding that they were on the verge of uncovering something that would shake everything to its core. They reached a back room where a small desk sat in the corner. Papers were strewn across it, and a single unmarked file sat in the center. Semyon walked over to it and opened it carefully, pulling out a manila folder. He handed it to Vladimir without a word. Vladimir took it, feeling the weight of it in his hands. He flipped it open, scanning the pages inside. The first thing that caught his eye was a copy of the same photograph he had seen earlier, the one with the shadowed figure standing next to Aleksandr. But now there were more photos, more details, names, dates, and most importantly, a link to a series of high-level government officials, each one connected by a web of corruption, blackmail, and illegal dealings that spanned across the country. Vladimir's eyes widened as he turned the pages. This can't be real." Semyon leaned in, his voice low. "It's all real, Vladimir, and if we don't act fast, it'll be too late." Vladimir's mind raced. This wasn't just a story. This was an investigation that had the potential to bring down entire networks of power, to expose the truth about Alexander's death. And yet, with each passing moment, the risk grew. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing on him. There was no going back now. The room felt colder as a shadow fell over the doorway. Another figure stepped into the light. "You've come this far, Vladimir." The voice was cold, calculated, and when Vladimir turned around, he found himself staring at a face he never thought he'd see again.